What's up, everyone? You're listening to the Grepcast from TSP LLC, bringing you a weekly look into the world of technology and technology-adjacent ephemera. My name is Adam Fisk, and today we are joined again by Kelly Ford.
Hello.
And Michael O.
Hola.
So in Grepcasts previous, we discussed kind of the weird surveillance state that is public schools in the United States these days. And it is gotten weirder, but before we jump into the 1984 future that is U.S. schooling, Mike, you actually found an interesting thing over in the UK, yeah?
Well, so I was actually doing a workshop around engineering for primary school kids, and in one of the schools that I was teaching in, they actually sort of told us after lunch they were going to spend a few minutes with the kids. And they sort of prepared us and said, look, we have a situation and we got to, talk to some of the kids and talk to the whole class and, kind of scold them about something. So I was like, all right, that's fine. We'll step out of the room. But what we found out was that essentially the teachers had found out, and I don't know exactly what they had found or where they had found it, that the kids were essentially not treating each other well online, and so they were sort of scolding the primary school kids. These are like sixth graders, essentially, like to treat each other better. And I sort of thought, well, certainly we've talked about the negative aspect of the surveillance part of it, but there is a positive aspect, which is like, and I don't know. I mean, presumably they're looking at Twitter accounts or maybe some social accounts that are somehow related to school or things like that, but they did use it as an opportunity to educate and keep people from hopefully becoming those sort of online trolls and bullies by being more respectful. So I thought, well, there is a silver lining on this cloud. I'm just not exactly sure what we give up by having all the social media monitored. So
right. And immediately we focus on the darker center of this cloud. This is a piece that's coming from, it's actually a collaboration between Wired and ProPublica, the article named Aggression Detectors, the Unproven Invasive Surveillance Technology Schools Are Using to Monitor Students, which cool, great. This is written by Jack Gilliman, Jeff Cow. This article goes through this now new, I'm going to call it fringe technology of having microphones in classrooms and schools with the sole purpose of trying to detect aggression, stress, anger. The kind of intro line to this article is saying, in response to mass shootings, some schools and hospitals are installing microphones equipped with algorithms. My own personal note, because algorithms work so well every single time. The devices purport to identify stress and anger before violence erupts. Our testing found them less than reliable.
Shocking no one. That's also another good title for this Grepcast. Shocking no one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, once again, we have a company that's exploiting fears and school shootings. Shocking no one.
Mm-hmm. So this is coming from a company called Leroy Electronics, which has been, to the article's point, doing this since 2015. And its algorithms are very interesting things. I think we all have agreed and talked ad nauseum about all the things algorithms can do, but also what they cannot do. This article is really interesting because you can actually click on buttons to hear what they're trying to describe through words, where it's saying, hey, that cold, like, fury voice wasn't being picked up. All these different things are being picked up. Somebody coughing, someone like having a strained noise, or someone playing a Gilbert Gottfried video clip, or all these things being picked up as potential events.
I mean, it's just, this is not about safety. This is about commerce. All these things are. Because, again, if you pay attention to the world and news, even people who aren't antagonistic or aggressive are shot and killed. So it's kind of like, this is just another way to get technology into schools. And make money. This is, according to this article, a $2.7 billion market. So, of course, they're going to market to these places, schools and hospitals.
So the interesting thing about this product is that when you look at the Wired article or the ProPublica article, you see this device which looks like a smoke detector. They have it sort of on these photos, like wires just kind of hanging out, like really obvious. But actually, if you read the text, they say that quite a large percentage of the devices being used for this type of surveillance are security cameras made by Axis Communications, which is one of the largest security camera manufacturers in the world. And I think one of the key sort of takeaways I had about this is, like, you see a camera and it can be in a classroom, it can be in a hallway, it can be whatever. We assume that is mostly just there for video, but actually every camera that Axis has sold for many years has audio capabilities, and whether or not it's recording that, whether or not it's piping that to some sort of software like this to detect aggression, that's just a flick of a switch, and that happens. So it does go not only to surveillance society, but it goes to sort of this technology that's become so pervasive and enables this sort of $2.7 billion marketplace, not because somebody has specifically said we're going to roll out aggression detection, but because they've rolled out security cameras for many of a number of valid reasons, and then companies have started to monetize this audio stream, and then they're trying to like process it and figure out, okay, well, now we can tell who's aggressive or not. But yeah, this is the worst version, I think, of what we had seen in the previous Grabcast. I mean, some of those examples previously were somewhat defensible, but this one is like, it's horrible.
It's real hard. The article does go to profile and speak with the Sound Intelligence CEO, Derek Vandervorst, who goes through a lot of their pedigree, Sound Intelligence, this company, how they tested similar technologies in a Dutch, quote, pub district, and was able to actually correlate between sound that they were picking up and actual police reports, which cool, great, whatever. But what it does say, which is really interesting, is in the article, the quote is, asked whether his algorithms could prevent a mass shooting, Vanderverse said, "I wouldn't claim that we could prevent a crazy loony from shooting people." But then even goes on and saying that, like, this software is so complex that if you use this algorithm and build it in a few bars in Europe and then try to bring it to an American school, it's not going to work. Like, they're completely different things. So it creates, I think they call it layers on layers of problems, which, cool, sweet. I'm glad people are spending thousands and thousands of dollars on this because of one press report from Europe 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it's just like, going back to things like school bullying and stuff, as you had mentioned, Mike, at the school you were at, it's like, put that money towards TAs instead, like more human interaction. I just don't see how this software is going to be good for us in the long run, as opposed to hiring more teachers, hiring more help for teachers. The funny thing in this was I liked watching the videos from the ProPublica, where the things that got the aggression detector to go off was pizza being delivered. Like, of course, they're going to get really excited. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just another bad piece of technology that's out in the market. And I don't know, I just go back to all of this feels really exploitative. Playing on fears and a very overwhelmed marketplace in terms of teachers and schools. So,
and I think it goes back to our point when we talked about this a couple episodes ago. I mean, I don't think that the people that are actually going to act aggressively, be it throw a punch, shoot somebody, are the ones that are going to get detected by this stuff. I mean,
right.
Kids that act out, that are verbal, that even if you want to interpret it as aggressive and verbal and all that kind of stuff, I mean, a lot of the time, like you said, those are things that they indicate certain personalities and certain approaches to things, but they are things that a teacher can work with. I mean, it's the ones that don't
Right.
don't verbalize. It's the ones that sort of sit there and fume inside, and then one day walk in with an AK-47 and kill a bunch of people. So to me, this is solving the wrong problem. It's a waste of money, absolutely, like what we've said. And it's sort of like, with all the stuff that people make fun of with Alexa, not interpreting verbal commands correctly, like, how could you possibly think, how could you be duped?
So the largest company in the
Right.
world can't get this right.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Well, and they
Exactly,
said
so.
even the Parkland shooter was one of those kids who would have not have been picked up on an aggression detector or any of this software, correct? So, but there was a good example in here. What was it? Valley Hospital in Ridgewood, New Jersey. So they actually decided to phase out their detector after 3 years, and they had a $22,000 pilot because the system didn't work as it should. And I think they had an example of a very aggressive person that they actually had an incident with someone where this should have picked it up and it didn't detect anything at all. And they had, I think, I can't remember, I don't have the article up, but 6 security guards had to come in. And so it didn't work in the instance when it should have. It could have been the use case.
Right, the
And
one
it didn't
time it
work
actually worked.
then.
But yeah.
It detected that as pizza delivery, so.
Right. Oh, shit, that's pizza. Never mind.
Moving to other things that I have no good segue for this. Cell phone security is a trash fire. A article that was published recently on Engadget.com, recently written by Violet Blue, called How a Trivial Cell Phone Hack is Ruining Lives. And this was just a crash course in terror and like worst case scenarios of every single thing that I've ever read and known about, like personal cybersecurity, all these things. So this article goes through and discusses how the idea of SIM hacking, SIM cloning, like, is ruining everything, because pretty much every service you have just really needs your phone number.
Well, it's not just like, I think calling it SIM hacking and SIM cloning makes it seem like it's a really hard thing to do. Like somebody needs to actually have access to your SIM card. So the way they explain this is it's sort of a social hack in the sense that they're calling up T-Mobile, AT&T, your wireless provider. They have your phone number and they get some key pieces of personal data that they can use to basically make it seem like that, they are you. And then they say, I got a new phone, right? And so they're hacking in terms of like hacking the system, but the phone company is basically saying, okay, Joe Schmo, that's you. You're giving me a new phone that you've just gone out to the Apple store and bought. Here, and then we're going to switch the number over. And as soon as that number is on that phone, because of these layers of services that depend on your phone number for texts and all this kind of stuff, there's this cascading effect, it seems like, where somebody gets into your Google account, and then from their Google account, you can hack into any of a number of other accounts. And then, the story goes on to like hundreds of thousands of dollars of wire theft and all this kind of stuff, which is pretty crazy.
Yes. The intro of this article is talking about a person named Sean Kuntz, who was a victim of one of these attacks. And the best part of this, because it's so normal, and I can see myself being in that position also, as someone who is very technically literate, saying that his phone wasn't working one night and he's like, technology, right? And then went to bed. And then he woke up the next day and was locked out of every account he ever had, and then was out $25,000 because he just was like, yeah, phones are weird sometimes, and sometimes you just don't get service, but it's 10. I'm going to go to sleep now.
Yeah, I could see this happening to so many of us. Easily. A little bit terrifying.
It's terrifying, and there are a couple of things in here which I think we have talked about in Grepcast, but maybe not necessarily given the good reasons on why we recommend certain things, which I thought was really kind of insightful. So one thing they talked about was using third-party password vault systems or secure password managers like LastPass or 1Password. And the alternative to that most people use is they'll just click on the yes in Google Chrome when it says, would you like to save this password into the Google Chrome password vault. And the really interesting thing about that is that once somebody gets access to your Google account, which, like, because of this phone number switch, they're able to validate that this person be able to reset the Google account and the password. Then they have the passwords that are stored in the Google Vault. Whereas if you store your passwords in something like 1Password or LastPass, just getting access to the Google account doesn't give you access to all the other passwords, which is sort of the treasure trove of the hackers trying to do this.
It's going back to the convenience versus security that, oh, I'm using the Google ecosystem for everything. I got my mail, I got my calendar, my photos, but now my passwords, it feels like a no-brainer. But yeah, then you have to get phished once. You have to have one random third-party website get hacked and like their entire database leaked out. And yeah, you're just a walking target at that point.
But how long until 1Password or what's the other one? LastPass gets breached?
Yeah, it's
10 minutes, 10 years, who
because
knows, right?
It was
so
the funny. Oh, go ahead.
So there was a major issue, quote unquote, with 1Password probably like, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, before 1Password changed to their kind of more software as a service model, where you could actually you would have a vault that would be stored locally in your machine. But hey, let's say I have 2 machines and you wanted to sync that with iCloud or Dropbox. There was an issue where your vault could essentially be opened up as plain text. It was this weird, like 1 in a million thing that like was in older versions. So they slightly had this issue already, but now 1Password admittedly is a lot bigger. They now have a cloud that hosts all your stuff on their things.
Well, but I think it's not necessarily that they're unhackable, right? Because I think that one thing we've learned from Grepcast and doing these podcasts is that nothing's unhackable. But I think the key here is that you keep things in separate buckets, right? And that means that you can't just as a hacker get from one bucket to another bucket without some effort, right? And it's the fact that it's a non-zero effort to go from the Google bucket to the 1Password bucket. Maybe there's a hack or whatever that allows them to get in, but each hurdle in that is resistance for them to get into it. And the key, what you can see in this article, is that if you do things purely based on convenience, purely based on what Google's asking you to save your passwords, you use your Google account to basically authenticate against lots of other services, which we've also said in another Grepcast was a big no-no. So, if you do all of those things, then you've eliminated all of those barriers to move from service to service. So now when somebody gets into your Google, they pretty much have access to everything, including bank accounts and all this kind of stuff. And that seems to be like the way to avoid it. Not, nothing's unhackable. It's just keep things in as many buckets as possible. So
I think it's kind of funny that we're kind of coming back to square one with this in terms of passwords, because when we all started on the computer back in the day, it was don't write down your passwords. And now in this article, the guy says, I'll probably never store my password anywhere, but I'll write it down. And it made me think of a conversation I had with Sarah, who's in information security, and a friend of ours who works with this high-profile person. And this high-profile person doesn't use email. And Sarah said, oh my God, that's my dream. Because that person writes down all their passwords in their office. And she said, we're just in that stage where it's more trouble for someone to break in and steal your password than it is to just break into your digital world and steal everything. It's so much easier to steal digitally. So I thought that was kind of an interesting place that we've arrived at.
And we haven't got to use this term in a while, so I'm going to bring it back. It's also understanding what your personal threat matrix is. Like, if you're somebody who's just like a high profile person, yeah, maybe email's a no-no, like you write things down and you have locks on doors, you have security systems, you have fail safes, all these things, versus, I guess, quote unquote, a normal person, a regular person, where LastPass, where 1Password, that is the system that is great for you and yours. But I will say, luckily, all of our cell phone carriers have created a quick how-to on protecting your identity. This comes from AT&T with really, really important and really good suggestions, such as don't share your phone number and keep your inbox clean, because these are really normal things that will help us in our world. But
well, yeah, unfortunately, the published articles by AT&T and T-Mobile don't really seem to solve this issue. But I think the one thing I would recommend, or address it at all, but there are processes that these companies have in place to add further security. And so I think the biggest tip that I pulled away from this is simply, as much as you really hate calling AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, whoever your mobile phone company is, call them. You're not looking for tech support. You're not looking for anything. You want to find out how best to secure your account so that somebody else who may have some of your personal information, will not be able to get in. And different companies will have different policies. Some of them have separate PIN numbers, all this kind of stuff. And yes, it gets back down to remembering more passwords. Maybe this one you write down on a piece of paper. But going through some effort to lock down your cell phone so that it can't easily get transferred to another device seems to be, at least in this case, a really good starting point for enhancing your cybersecurity.
Also in this article, one cool thing for me, I didn't realize that every single customer's PIN number for AT&T and T-Mobile was leaked in late 2018. So
yeah,
Cool.
if you have a PIN for AT&T or T-Mobile, give them a call and change it, please, because every single person's is out there, which is a cool conversation I get to have now.
Yeah.
So another exciting entry into the year 2019 is, we got some bad news for everybody. We don't own anything anymore. We're essentially leasing and renting all of our junk. This comes on the heels of Microsoft shutting down its ebook store because it's getting rid of a DRM server, and DRM in this case standing for Digital Rights Management. Yeah, so sorry. I understand that you may have purchased a whole bunch of books, written some notes in the margins, and they don't exist anymore.
Well, who used the Microsoft ebooks store? I mean, I definitely see your point here. But the fact is that, the thing that kind of tipped us off on this interesting topic was the shutting down of
a service nobody used.
Yeah, a service that nobody used. It only ran on the Edge browser, which is installed on Windows 10. So it couldn't have that big of a thing. But it is a very good point, and one of the reasons I'm now gonna purchase all my music on vinyl so I can own it.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds better, all these different things.
All that, yeah.
But it really brings into stark contrast of, and we were talking about this in our kind of pre-show planning call, where everybody has started to move towards digital downloads, either because of kind of Marie Kondo, hey, let's get rid of clutter, or you know what, we have phones that come pre-installed with 128 gigs of storage, so why don't I just download some books? Why don't I just download movies? And then I don't have to run around finding Blu-ray discs or anything like that. But it's all predicated on the assumption that the company that you purchased it from will A, continue existing into the future, or B, if they shut down, they'll actually give you the actual raw license, which is something that, to this point with Microsoft, again, one of the biggest companies in the world, that's not real. That's not a thing.
Yeah, well, it's basically a race between how long is it going to take for a service that is renting you content to fall over and die, or you falling over and dying, because then you don't care that you don't actually own the stuff anymore. But it seems like the services are falling over faster than the people.
Yeah, because it seems like every 8 months there's some brand new company that's all about streaming service A, B, and C. Like, I'm really sorry for every single person that was really excited by our past episodes about cord cutting, but the streaming wars are here. Every single person has their own streaming service that you have to pay for. Like, hot off the news that The Office will be leaving Netflix, for much to the chagrin of 800 people I know. But you hear about them starting, and then it's just waiting, and it's like that 2-year thing of like, okay, is this company going to actually continue existing, or do we like have to find the backups? But it's getting to the point where there's 2 really, really good articles that discuss this. One from Motherboard written by Carl Bodie, and then another written by Brian Barrett for Wired, that really just goes into the idea of DRM and how it's the worst thing for the best reasons to some people's arguments. But it's being pushed into everything now. It's not just music. It's not just movies and books. It's your computer. It's your refrigerator. What happens when LG shuts down the DRM server for your fridge and now you can't get ice or anything like that, or it just stops working? Like, that's something bigger than buying a movie for $10.
That's where what would that look like? What is a DRM for a car or a fridge?
Well, a car.
Car I
Tesla.
can get. Like the
Yeah.
like CarPlay or whatever. The again, my car literacy is very low. My last car was I don't know. I can't even remember.
So I think I mean it's once again all these like little pieces of technology that just end up permeating. So, DRM was essentially, well, as it was sold to us as the consumers, the thing that keeps people from pirating stuff, right? Oh, and by the way, as a side effect, that also gives centralized control over whether or not you can actually use it. So we can yank away that content from your use at some point in the future, like let's say the service shuts down. So it seems ludicrous for a car to have DRM-like features. At the same time, there are sort of examples where this has gone from media into physical objects, like the Keurig coffee machines, where they were actually putting DRM on these little K-cups so that you couldn't use, a cloned version. Yeah, the eco-friendly versions, because you had to buy, and I think it was Keurig, their particular ones in order for it to use. Now, that quickly got smashed to smithereens by people being up in arms, but there's much more subtle ways. I mean, is it that much of a difference from a coffee machine to a car? I mean, you'd sort of argue, yeah, it's a bigger thing and it's more complex, but from a manufacturer's standpoint, there's a lot of things they want to control. Tesla is very exclusive in terms of using their cars with their chargers and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of centralized control, which has benefits. I mean, you get software updates from the mothership and all this kind of stuff, new features, but they could very easily disable that car if they felt like doing so. And what are your rights and their rights to do it? I don't know that anyone's really tested that.
I think wait for one of these big companies. I mean, Microsoft, yes, they're a big company, but it wasn't a huge product. But if Amazon were to do this, then I think we'll really see what will happen. And I think it'll end up being a litigation matter.
And I think a lot of people were starting to get spooked about this and maybe the rumblings of something happening when Apple announced it. They're like, hey, iTunes is dead. See ya. And they're like, okay, so what about all my stuff?
Yeah.
Apple is probably one of the biggest DRM dealers in the market right now, because you have iTunes, you have all of the Apple TV, you have iBooks. Every single market that they have is predicated on DRM, app stores, everything. So if Apple says, you know what, we're going to something new. If you purchased anything 8 years ago, sorry, it's dead. For the majority of people in that ecosystem, that probably is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if there's a zombie apocalypse, you won't be able to download it. You won't be able to get access to it. The DRM won't be able to check into the servers. So you'll be able to, go to the bookstore and get a book. And that's the only way you're going to be able to read anything.
Mm-hmm. And the other main thing that I wanted to bring up is the idea of, we've talked about it a lot, especially in terms of algorithms or facial recognition, that there's too much human hands on these things, and then you have the ability for bad actors. So one of the largest video game marketplaces kind of thing, it's Steam, which is run by a company named Valve. People have dumped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars purchasing games because they liked the ecosystem. It was easy. It was one click. All it takes is you being an asshole once to somebody on a public forum, and you could be banned, which means that you are locked out of hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of content with potentially no recourse to retaining that. And I know that has come up to some of the laws in Europe on what it means to have ownership. So I'm very interested in if this Microsoft stuff does trickle down to something bigger.
Meanwhile, I think it's vinyl, buying books physically, not on Amazon, at your local bookstore.
Definitely.
Buy a car that isn't a Tesla, Chevy, maybe. And any other advice for our Gregcast listeners?
One of the responses to the initial Motherboard tweet was, I wonder if there's a place where books can be checked out for free instead of buying them. #library. So
there have been so many of those tweets lately. It's really
because every Silicon Valley person is trying to recreate the library.
Again.
Yeah.
My lord.
Get a library card. Kelly and I were talking about it a few weeks ago. There are some wonderful, wonderful apps that will allow you to download ebooks. You can download movies, and it's just because you are a card-carrying member of your library. So
it's cool.
It's easy. You still have the same abilities. Sure, you're just working with a different DRM, but, hey, it's not all bad. But that is the time that we have this week on the Grebcast. Thank you again for listening to us yell about the darker centers of these clouds, but we'll be back at it again next week. In the meantime, you can find everything that we're up to over on our websites, tsp.me and tsp.space. And you can always find some of the prettier pictures of the stuff we're doing over on Instagram at TSPLLC. In terms of plugs this week, anything on you, Kelly?
I was going to plug the library, but then you stole it.
I stole it from you.
But I think it's also important for people to know. They're like, oh, but it's the library. Then authors won't get paid. Au contraire, we do, because libraries have to buy the books. So we love it when authors love it when people get things from the library, because we actually get paid as opposed to people pirating our books. So definitely do that. And it's good for the community too, because it provides internet access, public restrooms. That's very important. So
that's true.
Shelter.
I spent a lot of time in libraries as a kid, so.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Can I plug the U.S. Women's World Cup team?
Please do.
Their victory.
Please do.
Yeah.
Right on.
But actually, my other plug is speaking of Teslas. Simone Gertz, otherwise known as the Queen of Shitty Robots, has made a Tesla pickup truck called the Truckla, which is a hilarious video, and it's all over the place. So props to Simone. It's a really cool hack. And when I say hack, I mean like literally hacking off the back of a Tesla, which is pretty awesome.
So until we speak to you again, stay cool.
Bye.
Bye.